Welcome back to the Authors Clubhouse. This week we have with us Leslie Bulion. Hi Leslie, how are you today?
Hi Erin, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very glad you could make it.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're a very well published author, and I'd like to pick your brain a little bit and let our audience know more about you than they probably already know.
Okay.
So to start off with, the audience and myself, we see children's author Leslie Bulion sitting before us, but can you tell me who you really are inside? Who is the Leslie Bulion? The real Leslie Bulion.
The real Leslie Bulion.
Yes.
Well, I could start, way back when I was born, and from there, that's a long story.
But could start wherever you'd like.
I grew up on Long Island. My parents had trouble figuring out where they wanted to live when they grew up, so we moved to Florida for a year, came back. That felt like a big adventure. Then we actually all moved to Israel for a year, came back again to Long Island, and that was a very big adventure. And that's actually a manuscript that I haven't finished polishing yet, that adventure. And went to college and studied oceanography after college, where some of my ideas have come from since then. And then I became a school social worker, and I did that for quite a number of years. And then I quit my day job to write. They say don't quit your day job, but I did. And I've been very, very happy and haven't looked back since then.
So what gave you the courage to quit your day job? That takes a lot of courage.
It does. I was very fortunate, actually. I have a very good friend, a very long-time friend, who was an editor of parenting magazines. And so she and I exchanged letters our whole lives, really. But when I was an adult, one time I wrote her a long letter about how it felt to... I did take a little time off from being a social worker when my girls were quite small. And it was a decision I never thought I would make. So I wrote her a long letter about what that felt like to make a decision to step out of the workforce and be home with children full time. And she said, I didn't know you could write. I said, I can? So she got me writing for the magazine. And then I told her, a couple of years later, I told her about something that happened to one of my daughters. And she said, that's a good idea for a children's book. So I thought, okay, I'll try that too. And that's when I really never looked back. And I've always loved books. I've always been a reader, an avid, avid reader. And in fact, my elementary school librarian used to look with me over lists of books to see, what I might like to read next. That's how much I read as a young kid, which was very lucky to have a librarian like that who, she knew, in those days I was reading a lot of fantasy kind of books for kids, and a lot of the girls my age were reading the Little House on the Prairie books and that kind of thing, and I wasn't really interested in that. So that's why we had to together figure out what the library should order for me.
Well, that's interesting.
That was really lovely of her.
Well, it kind of reflects in the books that you write today, because I don't want to give any hints, because we're going to talk about a little bit later about but you do like to write about bugs, but that's just a little hint, and that's not something girls would like.
Not necessarily.
So you probably would have ordered that in the library.
Mm-hmm.
Which I was going to ask you, who were your mentors growing up? Would that librarian have been one of your mentors?
I suppose, there have been so many, it's kind of hard to pinpoint. One of the people that I often think of is my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Brownworth, because she loved poetry, and she got me writing poetry. And even though I really never in my life, until I was that adult writing that letter to my friend, I never thought about being a writer. I did always write poetry, just for myself. And after I had been writing for a number of years, I thought, oh, maybe I should try writing some poetry that somebody else would like to hear. So I do credit her with developing my love of poetry.
That's interesting. Did you keep these poems that you wrote in a journal that you didn't show anybody?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just, I kept, maybe, even on loose pieces of paper and things like that, I would do the typical, get inspired in the middle of the night and write something down. As a kid, as a teenager, all that teen angst poetry that you write.
Did you do the dark teen poetry?
The dark teen poems,
Yep.
And then as an adult, I used to do a lot of what I really encourage kids to do now, which is sort of practice writing poetry by either taking a song or a poem and then putting your own words to it. I used to do that if we were, somebody had a birthday, or if we were kind of roasting somebody. I would always be making up rhyming poetry based on something else, or limericks, that kind of thing.
That's an excellent exercise.
Yeah, it's a really great way to practice, because you have a set rhythm and rhyme scheme, and so you can decide, with the subject matter that you're talking about, you can try to figure out what words you want to play around with, but you already have the framework, and I think that that's a helpful way to get started.
Wow. So I guess that leads me to, I almost have to skip the next question that I had, because I was going to say, did you always have that tugging feeling inside you that you wanted to be a writer? Which I find that kind of strange, because you went to the library, you loved to read, you just didn't get that feeling of...
No, I mean, I was going ahead and writing poetry, but never stories. Never. I never wrote any stories.
Right.
I can't even remember. I mean, I must have for school, maybe we had to, but I just don't remember that as something that really enticed me in any way. Reading, yes, and poems, yes.
But the rhythm of words is just, it's a beautiful experience when you're writing.
Yeah, so, it's very engaging.
Poetry is a beautiful thing.
Poetry was the thing.
What were your favorite books as a child? You said that you didn't like the Little House on the Prairies, or what kind of books did you have in your librarian order?
Well, I got started with Mrs. Pigglewiggle, the Mrs. Pigglewiggle books. There was, that element of magic, and was she really magic, or, I guess there were, I haven't gone back to really reread those. I remember the magical aspect. I guess there was a lesson aspect in them too, which I don't really remember. But then I read the Edward Eager books, like Half Magic, and then I read all of the Lloyd Alexander books, the Prydain Chronicles, the Book of Three, and the Black Cauldron, and I fell in love with those kinds of stories. Some it's set in earlier times, and some elements of magic, and a little bit of using a different language, or words that weren't, necessarily familiar to me, and I loved that kind of stuff. So I really kept along that vein all the way through, and then started reading things like the Tolkien books, and also a lot of Ray Bradbury, science fiction kinds of things. I really loved just thinking, not so much about entire worlds being built, although obviously the Tolkien books are, and so fascinating, but not futuristic worlds. Just sort of more the old-fashioned worlds, and also even in setting books in our contemporary times, but with the potential for something magical to happen.
Right, and that doesn't surprise me, because when you write, I did read your blog, and when you write, you like to go, you study things, you study the ocean, you study bugs, you like to look into things. Whereas if you're reading about Little House on the Prairie, you're just reading about a family and what's going on. You like to look under things, look under rocks, find little mysteries and fantasy worlds.
It's very true.
Minuscule worlds. So it's great that you did read those kinds of books, because it created a wonderful writer that you are today.
Yeah, and I was lucky to be encouraged about it too.
And who encouraged you?
Well, the school librarian.
The school librarians. So were they the only ones was the school librarian the only one that encouraged you, or
well,
did you get outside?
I had many wonderful teachers all the way through. I mean, I credit many of them with always feeding me more books, and I also had a wonderful school science teacher. We had like science on a cart. We didn't. When I was in elementary school, he would come visit. His name was Mr. Beaver. So I thought that was great. And he was very inspiring too, and just we would go outside and do nature study, and I was always really interested in nature and science. And in fact, I thought I would be a scientist when I grew up.
Which is your curious side.
Yeah, and I did study science. I have a master's in oceanography, so right here in Rhode Island.
Excellent. Yeah. What school did you go to?
URI Graduate School of Oceanography.
Best school to go to?
It was great. It was wonderful, and it completely informed one of my books, which I know we'll talk about later. What
are your favorite books right now? What do you read now?
I read a lot of different things. I'm always after a really good story. I'm not a great nonfiction reader, interestingly, unless I'm doing research, and I read a lot of science, to do research, but not a great nonfiction reader. But one of my favorite, fairly recent books that I read was The Book Thief.
And
by
who's that?
Marcus Zuzak. I think that book should be required reading for every high school student. It's set during World War II, and it is narrated by Death.
Oh, wow. That's
Death
an
is the
interesting-
narrator. And Death has a very wry, funny voice. And the book is moving and beautifully written and an important story, too. It's pretty amazing. There's a couple of books, that I've read as an adult that I think, oh, now I never need to read another book. Although, of course, I always will. But
Right.
that's one of them. And Cold Mountain was another one that I really loved as an adult. But I read children's books all the time, too, because that's the business and art
Right.
that I'm in. So
That's research.
it's research. And,
fun.
so I have new favorites of children's books that I've read as an adult, including, well, of course, these aren't so new anymore, but The Indian in the Cupboard, which also has that, it's a real kid, but then this magical thing can happen. And trying to think, well, Sharon Creech, all of her books. I
Yes.
absolutely love Sharon Creech's book. Cynthia Lord's book, Rules, is a beautiful book. And, there are just so many. And of course, I have many writer friends, and all of their books are my favorites. All of them.
How do you feel about Roald Dahl?
Oh,
is that how you pronounce
James
his
and the
name?
Giant Peach is one of my absolute favorite books
There's
of
so
all
much
time.
magic in his.
So much magic in that book. In fact, a Rhode Island story of mine is when I was in oceanography school, and I was working out on one of the coastal salt ponds, and our boat broke down, and it was winter. And we were stuck out on the pond, and we had to just wait for the boat to drift over to shore because we couldn't do anything, and we were freezing. There were a few of us in a small workboat. And so to amuse everybody, I told them the entire story of James and the Giant Peach from beginning to end. And
Well,
also we shared 1 cup of soup that somebody had in their
I was going to
thermos.
say, the time must have gone fast then and enjoyable.
I think it was helpful. I mean, we were still frozen, but at least we had something to do.
But you had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
If you could co-author a book with one published author, who would it be?
I don't think I'm a good collaborator. I have to say, I don't really have a good answer for that.
You don't have a good answer?
I find, for myself, my writing is such a solitary pursuit. I mean, any writing is, but I can't imagine, if it was somebody who I admired greatly, I'd be shy to contribute. And if it was somebody that I didn't know their work, I don't know that I would be able to generate the same. I don't even know how to begin to collaborate on a writing project. I really don't.
Right, because writing is very personal.
For me, it's very personal and very solitary, but I do share my work. I share my work with other writers. I work, with a writers group, and I get critique all the time, and
Right.
that's
So-
very important.
So when you're finished with one of your pieces, is there a first person you give it to, somebody that you really trust? That
Well, I have a small group that I share with, and every 2 weeks we get together and share our work. So it's not even necessarily a finished piece. We're pretty daring with each other now, so we'll read things that aren't polished. And
right, and that's scary, and that's important.
It
though.
can be, but it's also, there's an element of trust now that we've built up over many years. And so, I mean, when you do read somebody you're writing, it is sort of like, here's my heart.
Right.
What do you think?
Exactly.
But there's a lot of important feedback that you need to get from readers before you're sending it to your agent or your editor, and we really do provide that for each other. And interestingly, in the group, rather than when you asked, is there one reader that you give it to, I know kind of the type of feedback I'm going to get from each member of the group, and I count on that. One person will be looking at overall story, one person will be looking at sort of how does one paragraph or sentence lead into the next, one person will be looking for, well, where's the heart of this going, or, is the character staying true? So you get different things from different people, and it all adds up to
That's
invaluable.
important when you get to a writers group, that everybody has something different to bring to the table, and that's when you have a really good writers group. How long has your writers group been together?
13 years, somewhere around that.
That's quite a
Yeah.
trust you have going there.
Yeah, we're very,
That's-
very
that-
fortunate. It's a
yeah,
huge
that's
part
good.
of my writing life.
That's special. It's definitely special. Do you keep a writing journal?
I I keep journals with particular purpose. So let's say, I've gone on a trip, I'll take a journal with me and I'll be saving ideas from being on that trip in my journal. But I have a writer's notebook that I carry around in my purse so that if I have something, I'll jot it right down. But my problem with journaling is I have such terrible handwriting. And I'm not just saying, oh, I have bad handwriting. I really have bad handwriting. I can't even read my own handwriting a lot of the time. It's a very serious problem. So I try to get everything onto the computer. I really, I don't carry around journals that I really expect to read again. And if I've gone on a trip, like when I wrote my first book set in East Africa, I wrote in journals. I have 3 full journals, all pages of my handwriting. Whatever I would write every night, I'd have to go over it again and fix the letters, and it's a very tedious process. So that I would make sure that I could read it when I came back from East Africa. So I don't really journal regularly, but I have a bug journal. Well, now I keep that actually on my website. I take photographs of bugs. I used to draw them in a journal. I don't have enough time for that anymore.
So is your drawing as bad as your writing, or does it come out legible?
I think it's a little better, but I really, because I take my time with drawing.
Yes.
You draw, one line at a time really carefully. I'm usually looking under some kind of magnifying lens if I'm drawing a bug or something like that. So I really take my time, but I'm no artist. It's really just another way to get the information into my brain about that particular bug or whatever, what their joints look like and what their antennae look like and all of that, rather than just looking at a picture and putting it away.
Right. And that's so interesting that you can zoom in on its little parts. Because people don't just see a bug. They only see the bug. They don't see the little parts and the elbows and the little fingers or whatever they have for fingers.
And when I first started learning about them, I didn't really either. Now I have a better understanding of what's a beetle and what's a bee.
And a bigger respect for them.
Much more so.
Well, you totally blew my next question out of the water, because it was about, do you write longhand or by computer? We know you don't write.
Well, I don't write longhand.
So you must love the invention of the computer and the laptop.
Yeah. In all seriousness, I say that I don't think I could do what I do if there were no computers. Because even typing, back when I was in college, we didn't have personal computers and we had to type things, and my friends used to make fun of me because I was a messy typist too. It took me forever. And
really?
Yeah.
Do you just do you finger peck, or do you actually do?
No, I touch type. I touch type. Yeah, but I make a lot of mistakes. So when you do it on the computer, so what? Backspace, delete.
Right. Isn't that great?
That all works. Yeah.
Back in the old days of typewriters, you had to get the erase ribbon. That was awful.
Yeah, it was awful.
It's so easy now. My next question is about characters. I love characters. I think story is created around characters. And I'm wondering how you go about creating your characters in your books.
Well, I do a number of things. A lot of times for me, or at least so far, because I haven't written 50 books yet, so more often than not, my stories have started with setting. And for me, the way I tell a story or think about story, the setting is a character in and of itself. If I have a book that's set in the Rhode Island coastal salt pond, it can't happen someplace else. It's not like you could take the characters from that story and put them someplace else when you're telling that story. That setting is the story. So often my stories have started with setting, but then my next question is, well, who would be there? And I start to think about who would be there and what are they doing there and why are they there and what if this happened to them and what if this happened to them and what if their feeling about that setting is not the same as how I feel about that setting? How would things be different for them? And then I do actually, on the computer, because I can't write it, but I start to do like a little character notebook where I just start writing down everything I think I know about this character. Of course, their name and how old they are and what they're doing in this setting and who's in their family and what are their feelings about different things. And I can just write and write and write that stuff for days. But then it's not necessarily going to be that way when I actually get into writing the story, because things evolve as you go along. And then
This is true.
I look back at those and I say, oh, he was supposed to have 3 sisters and a brother, but he doesn't.
They disappeared.
They disappeared. Or I killed them off. That's the other thing you have to do with an author.
Wasn't very nice to do.
No,
but sometimes it's necessary.
I'm mean that way with several sad characters in my
So
books.
are you're not babying to your characters. You're very.
Well, you know, you have to hold
do.
their feet to the fire a little bit, or else it's not a good story. But when I say I kill people off, I'm being facetious, because I do write middle grade. Mostly people don't die in my books, at least not yet. And I may write too many characters into a book, so then when I come to the revision,
Right.
I say I killed them off.
That's when you personally kill them off. But the reader doesn't know that.
The reader
and they don't
doesn't
have
know
to
the
know
sad
that.
thing that happened before they
Yes.
got to the book.
Not like you know, Shakespeare and Hamlet. You don't do that.
No,
That's just
not yet.
That's killing too many people off.
Yeah.
So you know, so you go deep into the character development, which
I try to.
is great. Do you actually ever like take photographs of people that would remind you of the character and then draw from that, or just all from imagination?
I haven't done that. You know, I find that I'm not as much of a visual thinker as some writers are. You know, I know that you're an author and an illustrator, and I think that somebody like you approaches it very differently than me.
Right.
I sometimes have a picture in my mind of what the characters look like, but I don't always. And I also don't describe them most of the time really well physically, because I like to leave it kind of open. I want kids to be able to see themselves in my characters, and if I make them too much one way or the other, then they're not.
That's an interesting way of seeing it.
It's just, I don't know, it's a way that I've developed to do it. I don't know that I'll do it every time or all the time, but I've been so pleased sometimes when people come up to me and say, I'm sure that your character is such and such, you know, from this kind of family or that kind of family or this kind of person, and I say, great, that's great.
Because then it helps them to relate, and you haven't built the character totally for them. I've never heard it done like that. That's quite interesting. When you write, do you have writing rituals that you do? That you start? I mean, some people, you know, have to clean the house 3 times and run around the house 5 times and touch their nose. And
yeah, that's just avoidance. We all do those things.
Do you have any of those things?
You know, I hate to admit that I always check my email first. If I'm you know, really well into writing a novel, there's not much that can keep me away from that. There's nothing I love more than being immersed in your characters and in your story and seeing where it's going to take you that next day. And I mean, you have an idea maybe of some things that are going to happen, but you don't know how it's going to happen. You don't know what people are going to say to each other. And I love that, being transported to another world and really being in their world. Sometimes at the end of the day, it's hard to come out of it. I feel like I'm swimming up out of, you know,
don't
the
want
depths.
to come out of it.
No, really
Isn't that
not.
a wonderful feeling where you're going about your everyday life and you can actually hear your characters calling you saying, come on, it's time to get back into it.
That's
And
right.
you really want to get back.
Yeah.
You can't wait to be done with your chores, of your outside chores, and
Absolutely.
get into that novel.
Yeah, there's nothing better than having stretches of time where you don't get interrupted like that.
That's the best. You can totally get lost in that world.
And the flip side of that is, if, you know, what I say, life intervenes, which happens all the time, because, you know, we have families and we love them and we want to spend time with them and we want to do social things and other things like that. But if you're away, if you're working on a novel and you're away for several days or a week or something like that, getting re-immersed is hard work.
Yeah, you have to get back, and where were you? Where was this character at this time? What was I thinking before I
Absolutely,
stopped?
and it can take days of sort of spinning your wheels until you're back to the place where you were
Right.
before you
And
had
I
to
don't-
set it aside.
I don't know about you, but at that point, gets me agitated. I'm like, I was just there at that point, and then I had this big block of time that I got disturbed.
Right, I know. I'm better now. You know, I'm trying to make my peace with it, because what I've decided is that that place where you have to start working to get back into it again. It's part of your job. You know,
It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I'll try that. Try to think that way.
Well, you don't always want to be feeling bad that, you know, you get tugged one way or tugged the other way. I mean, that's part of what this writing life is. And so you have to, I find that, you know, as I go along, I figure out how to make my peace with the transitions.
Right. And of course, we all have to get back to balance. Balance
Right.
is the key word.
It's a good.
So your writing schedule, is it consistent or not consistent? Do you have certain times?
You know, I pretty much work all day. Again, if I'm immersed in a novel, you know, can't wait to get there. Hate to think it's 6 o'clock and, oh, I guess we better think about having something for dinner and, you know, that kind of thing. So I love to be in that position, and I can go for months and months with being very consistent about working. I mean, I visit schools, so that gets me out of my office and out in the world a bit, which is nice. And of course, I have writers' meetings and other kinds of professional things that I do. So, you know, those come and go. But pretty much every day, all day long. You know, if I'm between projects or if I'm doing, and again, even if I'm revising a novel, like say I'm revising a novel for my editor, I really like to work, you know, sort of nonstop. I like that feeling of just being so engaged by something that's what you prefer to do over everything else. That's a great feeling. Nice. When I write my poetry books, it's a little different because I'm doing research and then doing the writing, and so that's a little easier to come in and out of that because each poem is kind of a discrete piece that has its own piece of research to go along with it. So I can finish something and then start another thing. So that's, you know, I try to time working on poetry books to periods of time where I know that I'm going to have lots of distractions.
Well, that's great that you've written all this poetry and some prose, but could you show us a little bit of the poetry books you brought along with you?
Sure. This is my newest one at the Seafloor Cafe. Each poem is about a different sea creature, and each poem is a different form of poetry. And that's the same format as Hey There Stink Bug, which was my first poetry book. And this is all about insects, as we were talking about, the bugs. So same thing, each a different insect and different form of poetry. And there are science notes in the books for kids who are interested in the nonfiction aspects of things. I have a new science poetry book that's in process called Random Body Parts, Gross Anatomy Riddles in Verse. So I can't wait for that one.
That sounds like fun.
And I wanted to show you this book, which is set at a fictional version of a Rhode Island coastal salt pond. So it's a fictional version of Ninigret Pond, and it's an adventure about a boy who goes to the coastal salt pond. So that's what I was saying about setting and how that was kind of a big character. And this is a book about fourth graders who aren't sure if boys and girls are allowed to be friends or not. So I have a new novel that's coming out in August that's set at a fictional version of my town fair, the Durham Fair in Durham, Connecticut. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And that will be out when?
This coming August 2012.
It's coming, maybe you can come back and visit us and show us it.
I'd love to.
That would be awesome.
That would be great.
What I would like to do before you go, though, is have you sign our Authors Clubhouse book.
Oh, wonderful.
You know that once you come here and become one of our Authors Clubhouse members, you get to sign the book, and you can come back as many times as you would like, meet with your readers and do signings.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, I will turn my attention to the audience and just let everybody out there know that we'd like you to join us for our next interview, which will be with Catherine Housley, and she will be here talking about Christmas cats. If there's an author or illustrator that you would like to see here that you haven't yet, please give us an email at www.thestoryemporium.org and let us know who that person is, and we'll do our best to get them here, because at the Story Emporium, all characters are welcome.